evening, everyone. We'll call this meeting to order. This is a public meeting of the School Board of West Bend Joint School District Number 1. More than 24 hours prior to the meeting, notice of the time, place, date, and subject matter of this meeting was posted at the entrance doors at the Education Service Center and at the West Bend Community Memorial Library. A copy was also sent to the Daily News, WIBD, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and other media sources that have requested notice of our meetings. And at this time, I'll ask our superintendent to confirm that this meeting was properly posted.
Yes, it was.
Great, thank you. I invite you to join me and rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, everyone. Next on our agenda is approval of the agenda, which was posted in advance. I would move for approval of this agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, John. Motion and second to approve the agenda. Any final discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. I should have noted originally we recognize a quorum of our board present with all 7 members present. We'll move on to the public participation portion, and I have not received any public participation comment cards, so I'll ask at this time if there are any to turn in. I'm not seeing any, and so we'll move to the next item, which is our consent agenda. And we have a number of items on our consent agenda. We have minutes from the July 11, 2022 regular board meeting and the executive session. We have 5 contracts, 1 resignation, just going through my notes here, no retirements, and a number of contract renewals for Employee Assistance Program, Vision Insurance, Medical Insurance Network Contract, Flexible Spending Account, Health Reimbursement Account, Administration Contract, and disbursements posted to July 16 of 2022. So a number of items on our consent agenda. If anyone wants to discuss any of these items or pull these away, we may. Otherwise, I would move for approval of this consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second to approve the consent agenda. Any final discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, that motion carries. We'll move on to reports, and our first report tonight is our curriculum committee report, and our chair, Ms. Melanie Bergott, will give us that report. Good evening.
Okay, so the curriculum committee met on Tuesday, July 19th here at the Education Service Center at 8:30 a.m. The discussion items were the annual curriculum plan and the at-risk plan. During the section about the curriculum plan, we discussed many documents such as the course overview documents, high school course planning guide, and 2 new documents that will provide more specific curriculum information for individual grade levels. This will all be accessible to the public on the website for more transparency on the courses and what is offered. We also went over the process for evaluating and reviewing current curriculum on the 6-year cycle. Areas of focus for review will be at the August 9th meeting. We went over the at-risk plan, our program, which identifies students that are at risk of not graduating, and the support and plans to keep or get them back on track to graduate and to support their success for after high school. That will be presented later in today's meeting, so I won't go into a lot of detail on that. And I just wanted to mention that there is a video of the meeting on the school website if anybody wants to go back and watch any of that.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Melanie? Thank you to the committee for your work on that. We'll move on then to the superintendent's report. Superintendent Limmer.
Well, it's a few more days left in July. Pretty soon we're all going to turn our calendars to August. I don't know where the time goes, but we'll be asking our families to review and update their information in Skyward for each of their child in our schools. So it's important for them to do so that we have appropriate contacts, emergency contacts, and we'll start pushing notices, especially if you're transitioning from one school to another. It's making sure you're on all the right email lists. Because in addition to the district kind of pieces to update Skyward, you'll start getting notifications from your schools around important information. You're doing the handbook, when are pictures being taken, how do I sign up for clubs, pay associated fees, that kind of information. So make sure that information is updated with us. It's also a supply list, all of that is right on our website as well. And if you're having trouble navigating or finding something you need, you can call our schools directly, or you can give us a call here at the office. But it's just that time where we turn the corner, we're sunsetting our summer programs, the bulk of our programming. We still have Jumpstarts coming up. So just a reminder that Jumpstart events are for students entering kindergarten, 5th grade, and 7th grade. They take place in August, and they have openings. So any of these events would help students who are new to their school become more acquainted with the school, how things might work. So just check out the summer school webpage if you're interested. Again, space is available in all those Jumpstart events. Our next newsletter will include a survey on the summer school experience. We did some tweaks this year around schedule, making it a little bit more family friendly, those kinds of things. We'll get some feedback before we engage in planning for next year's program. So look for that. We'll make sure to target that. Speaking of surveys, we had our Esser Survey that we put out around federal funds and its use. We had 673 responses, so thank you to our community, and that went out kind of far and wide, businesses to chambers, as families in general, as well as staff to engage in that survey. So we'll put together some information, some graphs, all the supporting comments, and we'll get that up on the website by the end of this week. Hopefully we'll get it done to go out in the district news, give everyone that link right on Wednesday, so we'll make sure and get that. So again, thank you to everyone for participation. And then for the board, just circulating at your tables is your availability for the month of August. We talked about some board work sessions. Just a reminder to the public, those are a little bit less formal. They look more like one of our committee meetings where we might be sitting kind of in a horseshoe, something together, and having cross dialogue, less formal motions. Still can engage with the public, but items that we wanted to discuss were the budget and kind of the future, the facilities pieces, and student discipline and behavior. So just looking at availability, so make sure the board fills out that, and public watch for those to be announced. So lots of exciting work ahead. And then one last piece, you'll see it in a highlight. I know the board saw it when we were approving capital improvements, different projects. Summer's a great time for us to take care of maintenance. So some key pieces taking place this summer, some renovations, nothing large scale as library renovations, those kinds of things, but things from that maintenance cycle we needed to attend to. So we'll highlight some of those pieces for our public, and then I know my news column this month for the Daily News highlights some of those pieces too. So it's a great time, even though we have robust summer programming. There's a little less traffic in the buildings so that Dave and his team can deal with maintenance and some of the capital improvement projects. So those are all on schedule, and everything's ready. And then, like you say here, everything will be ready to open the doors so teachers can get in and plan for their classrooms. So yeah, that's my update.
Great, thank you for the update. Any questions for our superintendent? All right, hearing none, we'll move to action items on our agenda tonight. And the first is out-of-country trips for French and German. And Laura Jackson, our Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, will walk us through that item. Good evening.
Well, thank you for hearing this action item tonight. If you recall, Superintendent Wimmer spoke about this at our last board meeting, and tonight I have with me Carrie Simmer and Corey Petzel. These are two of the teachers that are leading the trips out. These are the first overseas trips that we are bringing forward for board approval since we had the closure of schools in 2020 due to the pandemic. So I am going to let Carrie present and share information about the trip to France, and Corey will speak about the trip that goes to both Germany and Austria, and then we'll see if you have any questions about them before we ask for a motion.
Thank you. So I'm excited to offer our high school, sorry, I'm really short, to offer our West Bend French students, sophomores through seniors in level 3 or above, on a 9-day excursion to France. So all eligible students will be able to experience various cities, castles, monuments, world-renowned artwork, delicious cuisine, and many historical sites that are not only tied to our French curriculum, but to French, European, and American history and culture. So throughout our trips, we're going to visit about 10 different cities. So we'll arrive in Paris, then stop at Giverny, where Monet's gardens are. then head up to the Normandy and Britannia area where there'll be the Normandy Beach D-Day Museum sites, as far as all the coastal cuisine and sites to visit there. Then on our way farther south, we're going to visit the Loire Valley, where there's several castles and history that goes along with that. And then the much anticipated stop to Paris. So there will be things like the Louvre Museum, get to see the Mona Lisa, lots of tour guides through several museums. And then ending as well with our last day at the Chateau de Versailles, which is just a little bit north of Paris. Where we get to end with a bike ride through the gardens around there, as well as a tour of the city and hearing about the culture of the castle. So not only is travel experience, as the students will be able to travel through bike, bus, boat, train, and plane. So then every stop that we make throughout the trip, and every meal will have some sort of history or story behind it. But now, questions that most people have too is, what about the insurance? So within our travel plan, there are two insurance that's called the Core. Now, Core is not new. It comes with the purchase price of the trip, and that covers emergency medical expenses and things like that. The new one is the Star insurance that helps alleviate any COVID stops along the way. So as far as, as far as getting quarantined, so it'll help alleviate the cost of having to stay in the hotel or the extended trips and things like that. So we really hope to go forward with this trip this upcoming school year, and we hope in the future as well to go back to our exchange program, but that's where we are for next year.
Are there any questions about the trip to France?
Questions?
I do. I have a couple. So the cost of the trip is paid for by the student or the family?
Correct.
And is there fundraisers and stuff they'll be doing to?
As much as we can.
Okay.
I mean, most of these students have, in the past, have been able to fundraise, but we've been on hold for 2 years.
Sure.
And the final payment, I do believe, is due in January, so it gives them about 3 months, which isn't a whole lot of time.
Okay.
So.
And then second, I do see the cancellation benefits and stuff like that covers $1,000 for the Core. And you said the other one, the Star, was
more of an extension, like.
So what I see though is it doesn't cover the full cost of the trip.
No.
Are families able to purchase their own insurance outside?
Yeah, you can upgrade your plan through the company.
So if a family wanted to.
Yeah, there's 3 tiers, I believe, so you can go, if you're like, nope, I really want to be secure with our funds, you may do that.
Will you be sending out information, letting them know they can do that?
Yeah.
Because I don't think a lot of families know
Right.
about that.
Yep, and we do have several we have an introduction meeting for families saying this is interested, and we have follow-up meetings that kind of go through the details.
Awesome.
Other questions?
I was just curious, how many students maybe are you forecasting to take advantage of this?
With the elevated cost and the smaller numbers, we're hoping between 20 and 15. Our absolute minimum is 13.
Okay.
So as we projected with our eligibility ones. I know that we're offering to our sophomores this year, but they may also have the chance to travel their senior year, depending on how travels go.
Other questions? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll talk about other trips, Germany and Austria, I believe.
Yeah, my name is Corey Petzold. I'm the German teacher at the high school. I'm really excited to be offering a trip to Germany and Austria again. This will be my 7th time leading students over there, and I'm really looking forward to the opportunity. Like the French program, we would love to get an exchange going again, but right now in the cards, this will just be a trip in hotels and tourist stops and things like that, so there won't be any host family stays or anything like that on our trip. It is also kind of straddling on spring break. It'll be an 11-day experience for the students. We'll arrive in Frankfurt from our direct flight from Chicago, and then we'll have our own personal coach bus that will accompany us throughout our whole journey. So we have a dedicated form of transportation throughout that. We'll land in Frankfurt, spend some time there, and then go along the Rhine River Valley Our first accommodation is in a beautifully restored 14th century castle along the Rhine River Valley, and it's going to just be an amazing sight to start off our trip. Then we'll kind of travel through the northern part of Bavaria, which is, I guess, kind of central Germany, through the cities of Rothenburg and Nuremberg, before traveling south to Salzburg, Austria. On the way to Salzburg, we stop at this really cool palace that's on an island in the middle of the largest lake in Germany, so we take a ferry to the island, a carriage to the castle, and it's just a really amazing experience. Salzburg is a beautiful city. My wife sings Sound of Music all the time whenever she thinks about it, so spinning around and stuff like that. So we'll spend some time in Salzburg, do a salt mine tour, hopefully, if the weather permits, like a mountain coaster, and just a lot of cool outdoor experiences there. Before traveling back into Germany to kind of the iconic fairy tale castle of Neuschwanstein. This is the one that probably you guys all have in your mind. If I say castle in the Alps, this is the one that you have in your mind. And then we'll head up to Munich for our last 3 days. We'll be able to see the concentration camp of Dachau while in Munich, do a really cool bike tour that kind of shows us the whole city, have lunch in the beautiful English Art Garden, and end our trip in Munich. So it'll be an 11-day experience for the students. For the most part, we stay in 3-star tourist hotels that are double occupancy. The one exception to that is that first night in the castle. It is a youth hostel, but it's a very nice, accommodating youth hostel. Just the only difference that I see in it is that the rooms typically have 4 to 6 beds in it. Still kind of the same thing. We have roommates with same gender rooms and things like that. It's just a bigger room in that accommodation. But other than that, we have our own private bus, tourist class hotels, and insurance that covers interruption or cancellation based on illnesses or injuries, as well as weather and things like that. So it should be a great experience for students, and I'm really excited to be able to offer it again.
Great. Thank you. Any questions?
Same question Kurt asked. How many students?
Students, my hope is 25. That's really my goal, and it'll be offered to sophomores, juniors, and seniors. That way, and doing it during spring break. I typically like to travel after the school year in summer, but doing it during spring break, then we can give that opportunity to the seniors who have kind of missed out on those opportunities the last few years. But my goal is 25, but I think we could do as few as 15 as well.
Great. Other questions? Right. Well, this item is in front of us for action. If there was a desire to split these, we could. I'm not hearing any concerns really from the board, so I will move to approve a high school student trip to Germany and Austria, a trip to France in spring of 2023.
Second.
Thank you, Nancy. Motion and second to approve these 2 trips. Any final discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, that motion carries.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Safe travels.
Safe travels.
All right. Next, we will discuss the high school athletics coach compensation model, and Hanson, Director of HR, will walk us through that. Mr. Hanson, good evening.
Good evening. I am joined by 2 outstanding administrators here in our district, Aaron Felber and Molly Hinks, who are our athletic directors at both West and East High School, and they have been instrumental in bringing together the proposal that we bring forth today. So, the district really takes a lot of pride in being a place of opportunity for students, both in the classroom and outside of it. And one of the biggest areas that we provide lots of opportunity outside the classroom is in our athletic programs. That being said, athletics has evolved a lot over time in terms of both what it means for students, but also the demand on coaches. And the district has not had a comprehensive approach to coach compensation to our knowledge in any time in recent history. As the demands on coaches and what's required to be a successful and effective coach in high school athletics have increased, we really saw the need to address that lack of a comprehensive model. Therefore, what we have done is, especially led by Aaron and Molly, we've looked to develop a model that both provides a way to recruit, retain high-quality coaches, as well as just a systematic approach which ensures things like Title IX compliance and some of those types of elements. So what Molly and Aaron engaged in is a process for first taking a look at just coach compensation in general. They engaged in listening sessions with our varsity coaches. They engaged in discussions and interviews with other athletic directors. They collected a lot of comparable data around coach compensation from the conference and the region. And that information was then pulled together with both myself and Mr. Sarno, the director of the assistant superintendent of finance and operations, to put together a framework that then has now resulted in the model that we bring before you today. That model is really based on some key elements, which you'll see as you page through the document. We want the model, based on the input that was collected, to be transparent and easy to understand first and foremost. If it's too complicated, people don't know how to engage with it, and it's disengaging. It then doesn't create that retention incentive that you're looking to create. Something we heard from coaches too is that the current system that we have doesn't really value the longevity of coaches, and we needed some sort of mechanism for allowing that to happen, which this model does allow for. It then dug in deeper on how do we honor the differences between different sports. There's differences on for a variety of reasons between different sports. You've got length of season, you have the amount of out-of-season commitments, you have the number of students that participate from one sport to the next. You know, on some sports you may have just a dozen students. Others, like track, you can have 100. So there's a lot of different factors that came together there. Ultimately, the model that Aaron and Molly advocated for and Mr. Sarno and I supported is what's before you today, which what it tries to do is organize the different sports offered by the district, which is a long list, into different categories so that we can compensate based on category at different levels. And again, it takes, those categories were determined using those variables that I mentioned just a moment ago. The proposal then brings forth two documents. It brings forth a compensation model document, which is really similar to the certified staff model document in that it's the type of thing that is meant to stand the test of time. That compensation model document is something that wouldn't see a lot of change frequently. However, the second document that you see attached, which is the category list, is what would be reviewed on an annual basis to determine if the amounts are still correct or in need of any updating. In that way, it allows us to keep pace as inflationary pressures and competitive pressures with nearby markets face us, and it allows us to adjust as wages change for coaches. So what you have before you are really two different documents, that compensation model, but then the category list, which, you know, the category list would really be something that Molly and Aaron, as well as Mr. Sarno and I, would review on an annual basis, just looking at comparable data regularly to determine if any adjustments are needed. It's also possible in the future that a sport might change categories based on, you know, that evolving nature of the rigor of the job of being a coach. As I'm sure these two women would tell you, you know, being a coach, you're not in it for the money, which I think is what we heard from most of the coaches talk to, but at the same time, compensation matters to everybody in anything you do, right? So it's important that we honor their work while also knowing that we can't fully say thank you for all the work that our coaches do in season, out of season, all those connections that they make. But this is a small way of us at least systematizing our process of recruiting and retaining them and demonstrating that we value that commitment that they bring. So Molly and Aaron are here. If you have any questions around the process or how they collected information, things like that, they're happy to answer questions about that. But in the end, what we are bringing forth as a recommendation is an approval of the compensation model altogether as presented, including the model document as well as that category list. So hopefully I've summarized that decently, and we're happy to field any questions you have at this time.
Thank you. What questions do we have?
So, Mr. Hanson, before this is not approved yet, but until now, what have we had in place?
It's largely historical. So if a certain sport has had a certain coaching compensation amount in the past, it's remained that amount, and it has not increased year after year, in some cases for a significant amount of time. So that it's really been based on historical pieces. Sometimes one school's program historically maybe was a little larger at some point in history, and that caused some unusual, differences between maybe the same sport and gender in two different schools. This is designed to kind of bring that back into alignment perfectly for us.
Do you know of other surrounding districts who have a model similar to this that outlines coaches' pay? Or is it all just negotiated by the coach?
So I'll let Aaron and Molly chime in on that, but I wouldn't say there's a lot of negotiation in these sorts of things, but I'll let you guys kind of share what you've heard.
So we did do the market analysis. So we actually collected everything from the North Shore Conference schools, and then also reached out to ADs that we have connections with in some of the other surrounding districts. So they provided us with exactly, football, this is how much they get paid, dance, gymnastics. So we are certainly, with this model, going to be in line with all of our other neighboring districts.
Do we have coaches who say, like if I coach tennis for you, or you, at the end of the season, Joel, are you coming back next year? I'll come back if you give me $500 more than you did this year. Does that happen a lot?
I personally haven't experienced that, but now that everybody's watching tonight, I probably have.
Her answer would be no.
Actually, I think Joel was saying he'd like to coach tennis. So if you want to get him after the meeting,
well, the reason I bring that up is because we are now clearly outlining what our coaches are going to be paid. And so the first coach who tries to do that, then boom, we're out of alignment in our own compensation model. And so this, to me, this can't just be a guideline of what we pay our coaches. This is it. And this is now, whether we approve it or not tonight, I don't know, but this becomes the pay of our coaches. And so, if you have a coach who wants to negotiate, I mean, now you are leaving the pay of coaches up to an annual review of the board. And so if you think you can go out and pay a guy or a gal higher to come coach for you, we're kind of taking that out of your hands.
So I would compare it to what we've done with the novice teacher salary scale, where we set what that salary is for the first 5 years, and we don't negotiate. That is what it is, and it's take it or leave it. It's our job to review it regularly to ensure those numbers are competitive, and that's what we'll be doing as a team annually as well, to ensure that those numbers remain competitive. And to your first question around, someone can say, I'll do it for this much more money. I don't know if we see that as much as I think you definitely heard a lot of coaches say, boy, I've been making the same thing for 10, 15 years, that the level of support that those individuals feel is weakened in that sort of situation. And maybe it's not where they march into to Molly or Aaron's office and make a demand, but it's where they start looking at other opportunities, or they start wondering about, gosh, it doesn't seem like the district values me when they're going to pay me the same thing for over a decade. Maybe this isn't worth it. I'm going to do something else with my time. Like we said, we're not breaking the bank on any of these amounts for someone. They're in it because they love working with the kids in our community and they love the sport. But it does communicate to employees when you don't change their pay for several years running.
I think another piece when you talk about individual negotiations, one thing we're protecting the district from is risk and liability. When you have multiple people, we wouldn't want 3 different people negotiating with 50 other people, and all of a sudden you have these disparities. So this eliminates and reduces risk and liability for the district.
Good point.
Piggybacking on that excellent point, I like your plan, but I also understand that different sports, it's more difficult to get coaches. Is it possible for a team's booster club to in some way supplement a coach's salary? Would that be illegal?
Well, it's not illegal on face, but it's not something we engage in because it is a potential for Title IX issues and things like that. So we don't engage with it because of the risk of what it can turn into if different gendered sports end up in uneven amounts.
Or different contributions with 2 high schools, 2 different clubs, different amounts. Again, liability of now this one's getting this over that.
So it sounds like this is one of those situations where you've considered all of the angles and this is a really good plan considering all those.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, you're especially in dividing those into categories, it's never a perfect process. I know Molly and Aaron agonized over how to group those and spent a ton of time on that, but we really feel that we've considered all those elements and also left ourselves room that if adjustments need to be made year to year, we have now a recurring process for engaging in that.
So that's what I was going to speak to. So we're looking at reviewing this. How often would this come for review?
So I'd really say there's two things that on an annual basis we want to take a look at. So the first is the category list, and that's really identifying the starting pay for those coach salaries, okay? So on that category list, you'd be reviewing both the amount of money that is the starting pay, as well as the categories different sports are in. Now, we don't anticipate a lot of hopping of sports from one to the other, but things change over time. The second piece we also talk about in the model that would be brought forth annually is when the board considers support staff pay raises on an annual basis. Now, considers, that doesn't mean take action or so forth, but we are also going to recommend that be the same time when coach annual longevity pay raises be considered as well. That has not, those types of pay raises for coaches who stay on year after year has not been part of the district's annual kind of pay raise review process, and that has resulted in us being in the situation where we're in. So there's two pieces there that we would recommend moving forward be brought forth on an annual basis. And if no action is needed for change, no action is needed for change. But just like with the teacher compensation model, if you recall, our novice scale had been very competitive when it was first put into place in 2014, but since it wasn't reviewed annually, that competitiveness was eroded and we had to play catch up again. Similar situation that we want to avoid with the coach salaries.
And then my next comment, which you and I always have this little argument, you know, it's non-negotiable until you can't find anyone to do the job. So I would just want to make everyone aware of that, you know, we know it's a very competitive market, whether it be for teachers or whether it be for coaches or whether it be for custodians. And so to be mindful of the fact that it's non-negotiable, but if you can't find anybody, then you're going to have to negotiate. So that's just something I would add to that.
And what I would say is our goal with this is to have, if the board takes action to approve this, you're giving your authorization for us to allow this amount of money to be offered to these positions. If we were having significant trouble with a particular sport, that might be a sign that we need to return to the board for some adjustments on these pieces. It's certainly, you know, in the personnel world of an organization like ourselves, we're employing 1,100 employees. There's different times when negotiation takes place, but largely we like to have that be something that comes before this body, right, for your authorization in a general manner, which is why you do things like approve contracts at every meeting and things like that. It's not for Lenny Hansen or anyone else to single-handedly make those decisions. So our goal here is to come in where we want to come in on these positions. Like you said, there's situations that arise from time to time, but we're very hopeful that those situations won't arise. And like, you know, like I said previously, usually someone's not getting into this for the money, right? Because they're not making, you just don't for this amount
Correct.
of money. And I don't care if you're in West Bend or anywhere. You're getting into it because we want to provide a really outstanding experience for that coach as well as the students.
Other questions?
Before you would take any motions, the other piece that I want to add on is if the board were to approve this tonight, this is really a first step for us because the same phenomenon of falling into some stagnation around some of these salaries is also present in our 5th through 8th grade coach situation, as well as our co-curriculars. So if the board were to take action and approve this, we would then look ahead to say, all right, how do we now engage in a similar process of collecting feedback, collecting comparable data, and finding a good model for those other areas? Because like we said, our district's all about opportunity. We brag about it, and we should, but we need to retain and recruit coaches in those areas as well if we're going to provide all of those opportunities.
I'm supportive of this. I really appreciate the transparency and also the way we talked about here too, the equity and the fairness across. It's clear. I acknowledge we'll have to deal with issues if we bump up against limits. But I really like this. My one question was category 4 is one where it was all WIAA sponsored co-op programs that include non-West Bend School District schools, and that's, you know, salaries to be determined collaboratively. And I totally understand the reason for that. Are there many of those? How many of those about are there?
So we have lacrosse, trap shooting, bowling, ski teams, snowboarding, trail sharks, and then, well, no, hockey's WIA. So I think that's it. Did I forget anything? So those are our club sports, but they still receive varsity letters. They're still treated just like any other. So you're still, there's like for lacrosse, for example, we have the West Bend Rush lacrosse. So yes, that coach is compensated, but it's not compensated. He is not compensated through the district. He's compensated through West Bend Rush. So unless lacrosse were to become a WIA sport, then we would cross that bridge.
Right, so that's kind of like a 5th category, because category 4 are WIA sports, which hockey would be, where we engage in a co-op with non-WBSD schools. So we, you know, who are some of the schools in our hockey co-op?
Grafton, Port Washington, Hartford, Slinger. We have 8 schools in the Ice Bears co-op that I oversee.
So we are the, I don't know what you call it, the lead
host
school for, is it boys or girls?
For the Ice Bears for the boys, and then Cedarburg is for the girls.
So for the boys hockey, we're the host school, so we administer the program and the salary, but all of those schools provide a contribution towards that, but we obviously have to be in agreement about what that amount's gonna be. So that's why that amount isn't determined there, because depending on the sport and what the other schools are willing to contribute, that can vary.
John?
So in the model, I don't see, you're not talking about having an annual set increase, correct?
Correct, there's no annual automatic increase. Just like any other pay raise, historical pay raise situation in the district, recommendations are brought forth to the board generally annually, but not always, but generally annually. The board then decides whether to take action or to allow salaries to just remain static.
So we'll go through this process again if you guys wanna up those salaries. And then is there a cap that we're gonna set for coaches? I mean,
this model doesn't include any cap. What this model would do is really the longevity piece begins now. Right where it sets all of our coaches now is at this starting amount. So each year that someone stays beyond this year then could impact their longevity. So let's say the board approves a pay raise next year. Well, then anybody who returns is now kind of 1 year ahead on the scale. So we're not going backwards. We know that there's a lot of coaches that have given a great commitment and many years to us in the past, but we're not going backwards. And we had to put something together that was both, we felt, met the expectations of the model, but was also fiscally responsible for us given our current budgetary situation. So longevity will be rewarded moving forward, pending board approval of those of any pay raises in future years. When you say we go through the same process, I would say in general the piece we'd be reviewing annually would just be the category list. The model document we really wouldn't bring forward every year. That is more of a framework and philosophy that would remain in place without change generally.
Any other questions? Right, this is an action item. Anyone care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the compensation plan for coaching. Did I get my wording right? Sorry.
I think so, and that would include the coach compensation model and the high school athletics coach category list?
Yes, it would.
All right, it is a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Melanie. All right, motion and second to approve the implementation of the high school athletics coach compensation model and the high school athletics coach category list as presented. Any final discussion?
Thanks for your time put into this. I think it's probably important to note that not everybody on this list is necessarily getting a big pay raise tonight. These are set starting salaries. Some of our coaches are above these starting salaries. Cost-wise, by implementing this plan tonight compared to what we paid our coaches last year? Do you know what the dollar difference is? Are we paying coaches overall? Is the budget going up significantly, or is it somewhat flat?
So the cost to implement this proposal is $81,000 in salaries.
So is that the total salaries of all of our coaches?
No,
That's the
that's the increase.
increase of what we are currently paying.
What we have to remember is that we have not changed coaching salaries in over a decade, right? So similar to some of those other examples, when we don't have a recurring process in place, you end up making up for lost time. This process, as well as the recurring decisions that talked about with John just a moment ago, are designed to ensure you don't have those catch-up provision years, that we keep pace now moving forward.
Yep. So the 81,000 is, call it the, get us to where we need to be this year, and then as John pointed out, you review it, and maybe there's changes, maybe there's not, but we should be competitive now on where we're at as far as starting salaries for our coaches to hopefully attract and retain them. And just, I always ask this question when it comes to salaries and compensation: will it attract and retain, and is it affordable to the district? Can you answer yes to those two questions?
I can answer yes to both of those questions.
And I'm on board.
Fantastic. Any other final discussion? Hearing none, I will call the motion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, the motion carries. Appreciate your work. Let's see, and next, Mr. Hanson will walk us through 2022-2023 Certified Staff Expertise Pay and Micro-Credential Offerings.
Well, this is actually a great segue, because in our Certified Staff Compensation Model, which was passed or approved by this board a few years ago, it calls for certain things to be annually recurred and revisited, and this is one of the items associated with the Certified Staff Compensation Model that is designed to be brought forth annually for updates as necessary. So we discussed this in last board meeting with some overview pieces around some of the strategy and priorities that were going to be brought forth in this year's list of expertise pays. So our expertise pays are a lot of the certifications or additional professional education, professional development above the requirement for staff that we feel bring great value to the student experience and therefore positively impact student learning due to the staff holding those various certifications or levels of education. The district compensates an additional amount annually for different types of educations. Those are listed here. What we have done this year is focus on a few key areas, as well as ensuring that we are valuing teacher expertise in all areas, as well as all different age groups throughout the district. So there are a few items to discuss. One is some of the existing items have a small increase associated with them. For example, the master's degree is a $200 per year increase. That's designed to keep up with the rate of inflation and keep pace, so that we don't end up in a situation like we just discussed earlier, where you end up way behind and have to have a large catch-up provision. So some of the existing ones, such as our reading license, the master's degree, the administrator license, those have some small increases with them to keep pace. Then, secondarily, we looked at opportunities to bring even more expertise to the district by rewarding certain areas. So, focus on reading has been, an emphasis on reading instruction has been a strategic goal of the district for some time, and it was discussed recently at board meetings. So we added reading license 317, for example. Some of the other opportunities we want to be able to offer students include computer science, so computer science teaching licenses in here. There's a lot of different pieces that are added. I'm just going to highlight some of them. We talked about some of the career and technical education programs. When you're talking about tech ed, business ed, family and consumer sciences, we created opportunities there around vocational licenses, the ability for someone to teach college credit courses in our district, which we have a lot of those. That's very valuable to us, and it takes a teacher who has certain credentials that the technical colleges will honor to say, yes, you can teach that class in your walls, and we will honor that with technical college credit. So certification to do that is included in here. We know that advanced placement, or AP, is very important to our community as well. So being certified to teach AP courses is another addition that was made to the menu that you see before you. You'll also see some things that we talked about earlier this year that the board has already approved, such as our ERE training is a part of this menu, which is a focus on reading instruction as well. And we're also happy to continue to expand the types of courses that are actually provided by our own staff. So for example, there's through the Concordia University partnership, we already have a course that was co-developed by our Director of Technology, Tim Harder, as well as one of our instructional coaches. That technology micro-credential remains, and now we're adding one around strategies for responsive behavior support for students that will be taught by our behavior coach in the district, who will be overseeing that. It's built on a framework that's been used in the district in some different areas before. So we're happy to both honor both certifications that are nationwide, universally recognized, as well as opportunities where we can take the expertise that we have in-house and spread that knowledge elsewhere, which, for example, the ERE training and our behavior strategies and technology micro-credential all accomplish. So there's a series of items here on the menu. They really cover the full gamut of different teacher categories, from world language to speech pathology to some special education pieces to, like we talked about, technical education, even areas that you might not think about as much, so sub-areas within special education, such as deaf and hard of hearing certifications, things that really attract those who are committed to ongoing continuing education and continuing their learning to be a continuous expert in their field. So those are the items that I've highlighted. You can see the menu before you, but again, this is an annual piece that we bring forward before the board, and we recommend approval for the coming school year.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Hanson? Start by saying I like how this aligns, like you said in your presentation, how it aligns to the district's priorities. I appreciate that. I think it's a good way to spend taxpayer dollars. Any other questions? Hearing none, as this is an action item, I move to approve the implementation of the Certified Staff Expertise Pay Chart as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Clerk. Thank you. Motion and second to approve the implementation of the Certified Staff Expertise Pay Chart as presented. Any final discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, that motion carries.
Thank you very much.
I think we have one other item. You're going to give us a bit of an update on the stop-loss insurance renewal.
Yep, this is very brief before I step away. Thanks for reminding me. So this is very brief. So as I talked about at our last meeting, when we had a brief discussion around stuff, a little more than brief, but we had a little instructional discussion around stop-loss insurance. We talked about how when a renewal policy comes up for stop-loss insurance, that you usually have a very short timeline to turn around that renewal and have approval by the board and have it implemented. Otherwise, every month that goes by, the stop-loss carriers will run your data new, and that could result in a worse renewal quote. So we kept this possible action item on the agenda as a placeholder in case a renewal policy was available to take action on today. We don't have that quote yet, so we'll just we'll pass on taking any action tonight, and probably have something for the August 8th board meeting. We'll just continue to keep tabs on that, and we'll be ready to bring it forth whenever it's ready. If in the meantime you have any questions about stop loss beyond our discussion last time, feel free to contact me or ask them right now.
Great. Any questions for Mr. Hanson on the update? All right, thank you. So we'll see this on a future agenda.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. All right, we move now to our discussion items, and first is budget development for 2022, 2023, and beyond. And Mr. Andy Sarno, our Assistant Superintendent of Business and Ops, will walk us through that. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. President. Good evening, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to present this.
We're in full swing of things. Our fiscal year has begun. More information is coming in front of us. The annual budget hearing, annual meeting is right around the corner. And I wanted to be able to share just a little bit of information with you on where we're at with the process with not just the 2022-2023 budget. What have we done in the past? How have we addressed projected shortfalls to continually deliver a balanced budget, make sure we're positioning ourselves well, and even then as we're looking ahead, because this is the second year of the biennial budget, what does that next cycle look like? What about that reliance on those one-time federal dollars? So if I have the ability, and I'm just going to click on slideshow here, why are we here tonight? What is the purpose? What do we hope to accomplish, both from a presentation standpoint as well as just in a full engagement of all of our stakeholders? We have some interesting things going on with our state as well as our federal dollars right now. So we need to be aware of that, make sure that is fully on our radars. Our budget process, just making sure that we have expectations identified, continue by all stakeholders, property tax owners, business owners, even staff, students, making sure that we're delivering that balanced budget, because that's an expectation of our stakeholders. Where we do have historical budget information, how are we using that to then roll things forward? I'll reference the Baird forecast model. What does that then look like moving forward? What can we have as assumptions in being able to utilize that information? What have we in the past? Because we've been kind of brainstorming, and even a few of you have asked some very nice questions. How are we going about making budget reductions, or what is our budget strategy? So just making sure we share a little bit of that as well. And as I indicated, that annual meeting, budget hearing process, it's right around the corner, a couple months away. But information will be brought forward to you here next month for discussion and action with those resolutions that are a part of that meeting that are voted on by all the constituents of our district. So that's really the why, is creating a common understanding, awareness, and making sure that we're engaging. Even at the end, just a little bit of a seed planting. What questions might you have at the end? What are you wondering after this presentation? What information might you be asking about? Is there something else that would be helpful if we shared a historical trend of our teacher FTE, or what our class sizes look like? Just a lot of that different information. So that's kind of the whole hope of tonight, leading into some big community meetings, and then setting that final levy and budget. With that federal and state money we are using, we had last year utilized some of the COVID-related dollars. We will be heavily utilizing those dollars in the 2022-23 budget. So again, what does that look like moving forward? Creating that awareness, so we're not setting ourselves in a bad financial position with a fiscal cliff, if you will. Our legislature, they urged us, they said no increase in the revenue limit, utilize those dollars for that purpose. That's what we are doing. Right now, we're entering, and we just started here a few weeks ago, the third year of the same dollar amount, or our same per pupil allocation. So 2 years ago, we had seen the last increase in the revenue limit. So last school year was flat, this year was, that we're in right now, flat. We're projecting out what that next cycle might be, but potentially there could be a large catch-up. The legislature here a year or more ago said, live on those federal dollars. We will identify, we will address what that next biennial budget looks like, so they're aware of that, but we just need to plan that appropriately. We have in past years spoken about just a little bit of a catch-up provision through that revenue limit. We're considered a low spending district. There's been a part of the biennial budget allows certain districts that spend, or excuse me, that have revenue limits below a certain dollar amount. That pick up provision, we had utilized that. That's not in the current biennial budget, but then what does that look like moving forward? So I have some data surrounding that, where we are, where we fit. Specifically, and I have this, I need to say we need to pay attention to the green boxes, but I would like to point out the blue. Earlier today I found, even, we just added this slide, but earlier today I found a 2021 white paper provided by the Legislative Fiscal Bureau specific to revenue limits. It was January of 21, not too terribly old, not exactly current. The most recent data was of the 2020-21 information, but at that point in time, with some exceptions, which the two exceptions that I'd like to point out in the green box, because we're about $10,800, including our exceptions, our declining enrollment exemption, as well as about $3 million of our voucher monies that we levy for. That's all 100% tax paid. They rolled those into the revenue limit, but our base revenue limit for that year, as well as our current year, right now, the year that we just ended, it's actually $10,000.52. So I'm just pointing out that we're considered a very low spending district, that the legislature's allowed for that in past years to catch us up, at least to the state average. So taking a look at that average in excess of $1,000, when you take a look at multiplying that by the 6,000 students that we educated that we're able to count as part of our revenue limit, it's a sizable dollar amount in comparison to our current authority. It is a live link down on the bottom right. Please feel free to take a look at that if there's any information. A lot of different data that's in there. The state excuse me. The federal and state funding, and again, we are in the middle of a biennial budget. We know what our funding is going to look like next year, but that next biennial budget starts in July of 23 through June of 25. So that encapsulates the next 2 fiscal years. We're already looking at that. It's already on our radars. I indicated the Baird forecast model that we utilize. That's in our models. What does that look like? We will as well over the next 12 plus months, and this is commonplace, where we connect with our professional organizations. What are others doing? How are they planning to move forward? But between our professional organizations as well as our legislators and staying connected with those folks, making sure that that happens. Bending some ears, listening and understanding what they're thinking, it's really important work. And then as well, I think in a typical year, you would probably see that late winter, early spring, the legislature, as they engage in dialogue, bring information forward for the governor with a review, which I could see that continuing into the summer, late spring, early summer, maybe June, July, not untypical, but probably highly dependent on what that governor's race looks like here in November. So, but just making sure that we pay attention to that, because I remember a couple of years ago, we actually brought a scenario A and a scenario B. It's one of the first times that we've done that, I think, in our district here, and just making sure that we allow for something like that to happen with some flexibility and some planning purposes, still being cautious and a little bit reluctant, maybe a little bit more optimistic or realistic on what could happen, but just making sure that we plan appropriately. This is our budget process, and this was actually brought forward, I think it was on December 10th this last year, leading into this budget season. And I counted it, so bear with me for just a second. But we have 45 documented steps and events that are in this document. So it's actually a 3-page, not meant to read here. Didn't want anybody to strain their eyes too much. We are in that process right in July, where we received that state, it's actually in statute, that we received an estimate for our category, or excuse me, our state aid estimate. I think it's a little bit off, that's why I haven't disclosed it, because based on where we're wrapping up our last fiscal year, impacts that actual state aid. So I'm recalculating that right now, but it's a 3-page comprehensive document. I think we developed it about 3 years ago, and at that time, when we created this, I stole from a lot of other districts, pulled this together. It was one of the more comprehensive planning documents at that time. It continues to evolve as Mr. Hansen and I in cabinet bring forward other items that should be on this, just to keep it on our radar and make sure that we're hitting our dates. We continue to amend this document. There is a link down in the bottom left to the full budget calendar. Over the last several months, after I presented that Finance 101 here a few months ago, all of our information on we have a comprehensive budget website for the district, a lot of different information out there with our audits, our debt ratings. So all of this is located out there, which is why I'm linking some of it. So where we have those 45 different items in the full calendar, You've seen this next slide before. So this is where we had the budget amendment this spring as well as the preliminary budget. And at those points, I highlighted where we were at in that process. It's just nice to see that. So just for some transparency, there's the website that I referenced. That's linked, as well as a highlights document that Ms. Kumpler had put together. We collaborated on in addition to that Finance 101, but just some of the milestones or some of the larger pieces that it's important to remember. We have our September 26th meeting. That was determined last year at the annual meeting. You will be taking action on October 24th. More information will continue to be available as we get into early October. We'll continue to refine the budget as we're wrapping up our staffing for the year, but just keeping a little bit of this information available. I want to talk just a little bit about revenue limits, and even dating back, because the first year of this chart that's in front of you, this the blue line represents the change in the revenue limit. The first year that there was actually a decrease of, for us, a little over 4%, is the revenue limit change each and every year dating back. That was actually part of Act 10. So going back to that period in time, the orange line, and again, as a part of Act 10, they've always tied together the consumer price index with the revenue limit. It's been a little bit loose from year to year. I could show you a graph of what that looks like on an annual basis. I think it's even a part of our annual meeting document. But the interesting part about this is, what access do we have of new money through the revenue limit formula in comparison to what the CPI or the consumer price index equals? It's only the metric of wages. It doesn't take into account what's going on with transportation or utilities or some other large expenses. What are we doing with curriculum implementation and some of those things? But so this just shares a little bit of a representation that we have a separation on occasion of new money versus coming in versus money going out, and where you'll see that gap between the orange and the blue. That's what I would call a calculated deficit. So we're addressing it, making sure that we continue to bring forward balanced budgets, but we're projecting based on this information. It's just a nice visualization to see that gap. We do have a couple years where that blue line exceeded the CPI. And what I'd like to say is, did we have a surplus that year? No. We still actually made reductions, number one, because of declining enrollment, but then the second reason is because some of those other expenditures that I just mentioned, where transportation or utilities and some of those other, they had the ability to cost more as well. So even during those years where, the couple of recent years where we did have an increase that exceeded the CPI, we still had to make reductions to balance the budget. Just a nice representation to see what that looks like. I brought this forward, I think at one time it could have been up to a couple of years ago. This is just meant to be a scenario. And the point behind it kind of shows that last graph where what happens when the revenue, which in this scenario is the blue line, doesn't keep up with potential expenditures going up by 4%. So over the course of 4 years, you start to have a separation. We don't do that because that's where you would have, I'm going to show this right here, a projected shortfall. That's where that separation between limited revenue increases with larger expenditures cause a shortfall. And what do we do to address that? We bring those down by aligning expenditures with those revenues and making reductions. And I'll get into what we do as a part of our historical practices, but I call this, and it sounds a little bit hokey, but I kind of call it the saw blade effect. So our expenditures go up faster than revenues, we make reductions. It's not as drastic, that almost looks like it's on a day over the course of spring, and as we roll into the summer, that's a process that we go through. But when it comes to it, we make expenditure reductions, we get creative, we collaborate, and we bring that forward to make sure that this then is that balanced budget that gets brought forward. When you roll this forward, when these conditions exist for multiple years, you kind of see that there's that saw blade effect that forms graphically. It doesn't take into account inflation, which inflation technically on those expenditure sides would be tipping up at a faster rate. It doesn't take into account on the revenue side declining enrollment, where we make accommodations for that. We right size our district with our sections and with our staffing. So this is just meant to be a scenario. So what have we done in the past, what are we currently doing, and what do we plan on doing in the future? So the first big piece is that we right-size the district. We need to start taking a look at building reductions or even closures. We have more square footage right now at this point in time, specifically at the lower levels, than we need. So what does that look like? What cost are we incurring because of that? We need to be aware of that. Specific to staffing, what configuration, what programs are we offering, what delivery model do we have with our some of our itinerant staff, our all of the folks, let alone just on enrollment, the number of sections that we have at the different schools, at the different grade levels. We need to be mindful of that. With benefits, we're a self-funded health insurance as well as dental. We have the ability to design what our health insurance looks like. We have a clinic, an off-site clinic, and financially we assess that Mr. Hansen has been great. That's even evolved over in recent years. We have the ability to assess whether or not that there's a return on that, which there is, a very large return, minimizes the expenditure, it even offers expansion to other all employees over a certain hourly amount. But we have the ability to design what our benefits look like, and we're doing that right now. Again, Mr. Hansen has brought forward a benefits committee, I think across all employee groups, and been very productive time with them. Again, very similar to tonight, of creating that understanding, that common understanding of what our benefits are, what they cost, and what we need to do moving forward. We also, kind of on that final, because this is where I talk about those utilities and the transportation, and even some of the programs like our virtual offering, things like that, we evaluate all of that. We make sure that we're not incurring redundant expenditures, that we know how we're purchasing things, our contracts, we're monitoring that a lot more closely, even just within the recent years. So we're making sure that then allows for action to happen that will then impact the budget decisions that need to be made. So strategies, I've already indicated we've done some of these in the past as well as the current, but what are some additional future years? So we're in year 2, we just completed year 2 of the Baird forecast model. It needs to be more common. We used it for last summer's refinancing. They said, great, not that it's rosy, it's fairly grim without intervening in some areas, but we do have that in place. It needs to be more common. We need to utilize that in a different way, just to be a little bit more useful towards us, not even just looking out the 1 year, but the future years. The further out you go, the less accurate it can be, because there's more assumptions, more variables that can play a role, but we need to be a little bit more aggressive with that. We need to make sure that we have the ability to reduce or remove instructional and support services. So this is something that as we geared up for COVID and addressing some of the needs at that point in time, what does that look like then moving forward? How are we delivering instruction within our school district? Above and beyond that, one of the important things to remember is right now between 2 different funds, we have our capital trust fund that's growing by 4%. We're up to $1.725 million in that. That's all of Mr. Ross's projects, our summer projects that we utilize, and then our other post-employment benefit, 1.65. So we're in excess of $3.5 million between these 2 funds that count within our revenue limit. And are we going to be able to continue to do that? To live within our means, to deliver the balanced budget without adversely impacting student learning. But right now we're continuing with it. We're making sure that we plan appropriately, specific with that OPEB, the other post-employment benefits, setting monies aside for future use. But we're doing that at this point in time, but we need to be mindful of that moving forward. And again, as I indicated on the previous line with the benefits, we have the ability to work with our staff and to be able to plan ahead for any changes. It'd be naive to think that, not think that districts aren't planning and relying more heavily on both capital referendums, but as well as operational referendums. Purposely put this in today, not suggesting it, but there are districts that are relying more heavily on those. So what are some next steps? So coming forward here in August, both at the discussion and then action of 2 different meetings, we're going to be coming forward with our annual meeting resolutions, as well as new information becomes available, because there are still assumptions in the budget. just making sure that we share those with you and make those public. Annual meeting and budget hearings on September 26th up at the Silver Lining Art Center. And then on October 24th, taking action on that final budget, as well as setting the levy, which is the dollar amount that gets spread across all property tax owners, which is the mill rate, or how much is paid per $1,000 value. And then I joke about this, but it's quite literal, is right after that takes place on October 24th, we roll right into taking a look what that next year, that 23-24 school year looks like. Since we have the Baird forecast model, once we get all of our information uploaded, we can start looking at that right away, but we need to make sure that we're monitoring that very closely, and then starting all over again with that next calendar of the 54 or 44 different meetings. That seed that I planted, it doesn't have to be tonight, but is there other information that would be helpful? Mr. Hansen's been gathering human resources information, what our staffing looks like. We can run reports, we can gather different data sets. What would be helpful? Is there something that making sure that we continue to have trust with the community moving forward? But happy to have a discussion if there's any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Sarno? I appreciate this is good background information of where we've been and where we're going. A nice lead into the next items that we have around those annual meeting resolutions coming up. So it sounds like the offer stands that maybe if people don't come forward with information that they'd like to see tonight, just let you know and feel included for the next time we meet.
Are you
Questions?
looking for the board to communicate to you as far as what we believe our priorities are in our community? Such as, you know, a couple of your bullet points talk about minimizing interruption to student learning and possibly reducing or removing instructional and student support services. You know, to me that means potentially cutting programs, whether that's cutting, I don't know, something in art or music or foreign language or whatever. I would think, I don't know for sure, but I would think our community does value those types of programs. And so I guess, are you looking for that type of input from the board as it comes to our budget, and how do we keep a balanced budget from year to year? Or will you be coming to us with ideas and potential solutions and things?
So both ways. One, we're not seeking the board in isolation to do that. When it comes time to do that, and we have our budget workshop with Baird and all of that, we have a stronger foundation of kind of what that next 3 to 5 years potentially looks like. That's when we start engaging in conversations with our community to understand and synthesize their thoughts so that you're truly representing them. Certainly you engage with constituents all the time, and that dialogue should be open and you should continue sharing, but we wouldn't poise you to do that in isolation without welcoming the entire community in for a conversation around those things. And so we look forward to doing that, but we don't do that in summer. We do that when school's back in session, so families are a little bit more accessible. So we've talked about and had kind of a lesson plan around that for potentially September, October, depending on kind of how far we get with, remember the building blocks are around the budget piece as well as that facilities comprehensive update around kind of what's the status of those, what would costs be, all of those items. So, but certainly as we go, continue sharing. People should reach out to us, reach out to Andy. He's very accessible and can present budget in a way that people with a background don't have. But if you have in between now and the Baird piece, as we're gathering, if you have ideas of like, hey, when we dig into this, this would be helpful. Or, you know, now that we've got the, you know, I think Brian talked about it, you know, you got the house paid off, you know, do we need a home equity loan around some of these improvements we've deferred? You know, those are the conversations we need to engage in.
I guess I would like to see some comprehensive information in regards to right-sizing the district. So, you know, how many, you know, I know we have declining enrollment, and I'm going off the cuff here, so I'm trying to come up with a good way to phrase this, but, you know, we have discussed briefly, no one has made any decisions, but there has been conversation in the past about, the Rolfs Education Center, and what does that look like in the future, and what does this building actually look like in the future? So to me, those are potentially lower hanging fruit to look at than, hey, we're gonna close XYZ grade school. Notice I did not say a name. So, I'd like to see that information. What does it look like if we close this building and we, move around the people who are housed in this building to other locations that have room? Well, what does that cost savings look like to us? Because I can tell you, no offense to anyone who works in this building, we appreciate you all, but moving you is much higher priority to me than cutting a program for any student ever. So, that would be a critical piece to me. Same with the Rolfs education situation. I've always felt strongly that I'd like to see the little kids in the appropriate buildings that they may go to eventually. So if I'm in the McLean district, why am I coming here as opposed to potentially, being at McLean? If that would work, I'd like to see some of that data, because I think once you get the little kids into one of those buildings, it's hard for them to leave after they figure out this will be my teacher and this is my principal and all of those things. So while I know sometimes it's easy for some people to say, well, we should cut this or we should cut that, I really want to see us look at the things that affect our students the least, quite honestly. So again, no offense to you, but I don't really care if you're driving to the high school every day or you're driving to this building. It doesn't matter to me, and it certainly doesn't matter to our students.
Okay.
I would like to see an update on where we're at with temporary grants. I know the district has received with COVID, and you hear other things in the news about money that could be available, and an update of what we have applied for and when it comes in, how much it is, what we spend it on. Something that would help us communicate to members of our community how we're taking advantage of those opportunities.
Great, we can continue to expand, but just a plug for our community that might be watching, there's an entire webpage around just the Esser funds, those COVID-related funds, the different rounds of it, how they've been spent, and then we'll post the survey results there. So let me just give a plug to our community on that sliver of those pieces.
I would just like to add to Nancy's point, when discussing right sizing and maybe closing buildings as far as this one or whatever, it might be beneficial to put out a survey for any eligible employees that might, you might see fit that can work from home even. You might get if there's anybody that can do that, you might get a, smaller number of people that you have to move around. That might be a little easier to kind of, align those with our current buildings that you can fit them into. Just thought.
Other questions, other thoughts? All right. Clearly this will come back for additional discussion, so thank you very much for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Appreciate your time, thank you.
All right, and we will also discuss the annual at-risk plan. I believe Joe Corbett, our Student Services Program Administrator, is going to walk us through that item.
Just a note for the board and the community, we were unable to load this presentation into board docs. You'll see it this evening. We have an open ticket into board docs. Something was happening where it was not saving in that, so you won't see this attached. Normally you see all of our presentations attached. I just wanted to call that out specifically. And we'll get that loaded as soon as possible. They still have yet to resolve the case.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. I just want to take a quick second here. I know we've had the opportunity to meet all of you, but for our community members who might be watching, I'm Emily Melstrand. I'm the Director of Student Services, and I am here tonight with my colleague Jill Corbett. She is the Program Administrator for Student Services, and our goal tonight is to provide some information about how we serve students who are considered at risk. And I'm just going to preface before I hand it over to Jill that you're going to notice tonight that we're going to be focusing quite a bit on students in grades 6 and up, and really talking about being at risk for high school graduation. But I think it's really important that everybody understands that we really start thinking about avoiding an identification of at risk as kids come into our system. So we try to be very responsive to student data, beginning as early as pre-K and identifying whether or not students need additional supports and services in order to progress towards graduation. So Jill is gonna lead this conversation tonight. I'm gonna hang out just in case there's questions that are more student service connected. But Jill's role in the district as our program administrator really encompasses kind of the direction of our alternative programming. So she's got some really exciting things to share about the work that we're doing, and Tani and Melanie had the opportunity to engage in some pretty detailed conversation earlier, or it was early last week. So please feel free, if we're missing things that you want us to highlight, please feel free to jump in and just comment on those, okay? So Jill Corbett. You want to come here and I'll be the driver of the...
As Emily said, we did do a more comprehensive earlier in the week or last week. But what I want to, I believe all you guys have the at-risk plan. I don't want to bore you and go through that whole entire thing. So what we want to do today is kind of like go through some of the key parts that we as a school district need to follow just based on DPI requirements, but then also like how we take that information and what it looks like in our district specifically. And I also want to just highlight a couple key success things that are going on in our districts. I think it's always good to have those moments of when we're doing programs well, what does that look like? So our first slide is basically just what is a requirement? What do we have to do as a school district for DPI on at-risk? And one of the biggest things is who takes this role? You can see us right now. We are the ones taking over the role. And then making sure we have work-based learning experiences, programs and activities within the district, making sure that there are curricular modifications and alternative programs that align to graduation requirements. Just making sure that there is a notification of it where if the student is considered at risk, and we will talk about what that means, that parents and guardians are informed about that and as early as possible. We also want to make sure that we create access for all students that need any additional services, plans, wraparound at any time. And then just making sure that special education related services are provided for eligible students. So understanding that a student may be identified as a student with a disability, but also may have an at-risk label at some point. And we'll kind of talk about that further when you look at the criteria of that. So our goal for the program, when we really look at what do we want to see in the West Bend School District, our number one thing obviously is increased graduation rates. We have good graduation rates, but it's not 100%, right? So that's always going to be our thriving goal, first and foremost. As a district, we talk a lot within our buildings about what makes a student want to come to school, right? If I'm not able to get them to school, I can't educate them, and that's one of our big indicators. So really making sure that they have that increased sense of belonging and caring about their environment. We want to make sure that we reduce some academic failures early, not having to always look at 12th grade, and also like making sure that they don't drop out, right? Like that would be a way that we cannot then wrap around them. We look constantly, one of our goals is to make sure that we're doing proactive interventions. If we are seeing something, we're jumping in and as a school district making plans, whether that's at the classroom level or at a building level of a wraparound plan. And then always making sure that we're involving parents, guardians, but also who else do we need at the table? There's a big picture for every student and making sure that we are seeing the big picture on what the student's needs are. So for us, this kind of envelops like our direction.
My only job is to drive the mouse right now, and I'm clearly failing. There we go.
All right. So when we think about what is the state's, how do they say this is an identification of at-risk? So really looking, they tend to look at students, again, we kind of talked about it earlier, grades 5 through 12. And although that is what this list is kind of looking at, again, as a district, we always want to look at pre-K through 12, and if there's an indicator or something's like sparking as a concern, we want to jump in as early as possible. But for the identification, we're really looking at for kids that fall that 1 or more years behind their same age peers in credit. So that really would be looking at your high school age students. That they may have skills that fall 1 to 2 years below their peers, sometimes even more. Habitual truancy, that was kind of going back to when we were talking about if you're not there, we can't educate you, right? So that's one of those big target things we want to always be looking at in our buildings is truancy and trying to intervene early. School-age parents. It doesn't happen often, but it is something that we want to make sure we are wrapping around and creating a plan early. Making sure if we have any adjudicated delinquent youths that have participated in programs possibly like our Juvenile Detention Center or residential centers, when they come back, how do we wrap around them and ensure some success? And then also looking at that 8th grade test scores and just looking at where they fall and if there's indicators that are falling below that they maybe struggle when they get to high school. So those are our key components that the state says really tells us this child may be at risk of not graduating.
So you mentioned the Juvenile Detention Center, we serve as a county seat.
Yep.
Can you just explain to this team around that they may not know or our wider community?
Sure, absolutely. So we have a Juvenile Detention Center in our current district, and by state law, if your district has a Juvenile Detention Center, you are in charge of the education. And I don't know if many of you know this, but we actually house 2 Westmont School District at-risk teachers and 2 additional paraprofessionals at that facility. We run 2 full classrooms, sometimes an additional 3rd, depending on our numbers. We service kids across the entire state. I will say that we are very lucky that we don't have a ton of Westmont School District kids there, but we are accountable for every kid that comes in there. And students can stay anywhere from 24 hours to 6 months. That's kind of how our facility runs.
When you, just to make sure people understand, when you say ours, it's not our districts.
It's not our districts.
It's located within our district.
Yes.
So it's not something we created, but when anyone has that, so when I served in Waukesha, we also had a juvenile. If you are in the boundaries of where that is, then it's the application for the district. And again, it's not incurring expense that is supported by the state. Those are state dollars that come to us to support that. We just happen to be kind of the educational authority that serves.
Correct.
I think it's also important to be clear, the Juvenile Detention Center is a jail. So
yes.
It's not a place where if you have a misbehaving student at the high school, the teacher or principal can say, you're going to the Juvie Detention Center. That is not what it is.
No, we cannot place anyone there.
We do not, that's a good way to
do not
describe
place
it.
anyone
We
there.
do not place anyone there,
Right.
the court system,
Right.
or,
And we serve the students who are placed there through the court system.
Yep.
And that really, I mean, we serve students in that location between the ages of 10 and 21.
Yes.
And they aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily originate from our district either. They could be students from other areas.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, so the Washington County Sheriff's Department contracts out, they say contracts out vets. And so the students that are currently at that facility range, we serve Washington County, Ozaukee County, Fond du Lac County, and to be very honest with you, the state of Wisconsin has gone from 15 facilities to 11. So we get contracts from, we serve all Waukesha girls. The Juvenile Detention Center serves a lot of Kenosha, Racine area, and any overflow from Milwaukee. But we get, Sheriff's Department will get calls from Dane County, all over. I think last year we had something like, I wish I had the report for me. It was something about like 20 different counties that had utilized the facility.
Aren't we one of the few ones that accepts juvenile females?
So most accepted, but for Waukesha, they do not have a facility that accepts girls. And then with Milwaukee County being a lot of overflow, they tend to deny them. So we do take all of Waukesha girls. Yeah. And like Emily said, we serve from ages 10 through 21, so, and the students there do go to school from 8 to 2:30. It is a full school day. We do all your core subjects. We do have elective classes that they can take, as well as adding in Phi-Ed, music, art.
It just looks very different at that site.
I've seen it, I've taken a tour.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Any other questions before Bob?
Yeah.
Our
Others?
detention center?
Go ahead.
So this lovely graph. Our big thing we want to explain is students just don't start going all the way up to the red, like significant wraparound, unless there is a big issue that happened. We start at tier 1, which is really that universal level for all students, really targeting in-class interventions. What can the teacher do for accommodations, modifications, making sure we're monitoring progress, whether it's behavioral or academic, really looking at that classroom-based level, keeping the kid in the classroom as much as possible. If we move up, as you can see, the grouping gets smaller, so you're looking at tier 2, and this is where we're saying, like, maybe there's some more risk factors going on. We may include at the building level a small team coming together to really problem solve, look at the need of the student, and come up with a plan. So that's where you're gonna get more targeted interventions, more of a team meeting plan when you're doing your progress monitoring, saying, where are we at? It's probably happening more often and more discussions. Our tier 3, our intensive students, that's really when you look at that highly individualized plan. It is very specific for that student. It's not always saying what program we're using, we're saying what is the need of that student. Making sure that you are meeting on very regular basis, looking at data to see if there's progress being made, or if anything else has to occur. This is though where that conversation at that peak level where we may start talking about some alternative programming that might have to happen for the student. But again, you can see through the tier programming, you've gone through a lot of different plans and options and intervening. The other thing I just want to target is, if you see on the, depending on how you're looking at it, the left side, one of our biggest things is continuously that parent communication. So as you're meeting and the at-risk is going higher, you want to continue to make sure that those parents are being part of that conversation more often, and really what the needs are, not only at school, but is there something going on in the community and at home?
I just wanted to mention, and we talked a lot about this last week, is, you know, we talk about the tier and really trying the tier interventions and focusing first universally. And if you remember when Jill talked about, you know, some of our goals, I mean, one of our goals is always to make sure that kids feel engaged and connected to their school community. And so we want to do as much as we can to support learners in their regular education environment, because as soon as we start pulling them out, we start fragmenting their connection and relationship with their peers and their classroom. Now that being said, sometimes we work up that, that pyramid, and we do have to start looking at different options on behalf of that student. Typically, that's kind of a long process with lots of meetings and discussion, but there are times that we have to jump to a tier 3 or a more intensive program. Sometimes that's in response to a disciplinary situation. Something has occurred and we need a different plan for a student. Sometimes it's in response to something happening in that student's life that doesn't have anything to do with school. You know, a medical situation or some struggles with mental health that drive us to considering those options more quickly. But I just wanted to make sure that we emphasized really the importance of keeping kids connected to their peers and their school.
So one of the things that we're tasked with when you think of that top level point is really being creative, I guess, really offering,
I'm I'm sorry, Jill, I'm actually gonna jump to this one,
Okay.
because I think this is visually easier just to look
Okay,
at, so.
that is completely fine. So again, being creative and really looking at the need of the students. So again, we talked about this, starting at that classroom base. That's where we're always gonna start, really working with the teacher, what they can do within that environment, and collecting that data. The next step is that targeted interventions. So this is really looking at potentially like if they are having reading delays, what is a targeted intervention? They may stay in the classroom, they may get pulled for or get additional instruction in. Behavior intervention, perhaps there's a behavior plan that gets created to wrap around some positive behavior things for the student. We look at, when we get to upper levels, we look at sometimes some credit recovery and skill development classes. What's lacking? Why did we not pass a class? What was it that was the barrier, and what do we need to do to help with that? And at times we do look at alternative schedules. There are kids that, based on sometimes medical or other issues, the schedule is part of the issue. If things don't work within those two categories, we go over to the alternative programming. And within our district, we have several different areas that we look at. This is just a couple, we did not mention everything, but look at sometimes work-based learning. You know, those students that really love that hands-on type of learning. We look at our Gdl2, it's our alternative education for graduation program for our seniors. We have what's called a personalized academic credit education. Our PACE really is to have the students at the high school level stay within an environment 2 to 3 class periods at a time, working with that teacher. So they're not moving around every 48 minutes, more like creating that relationship, trust, and really working on some skills and credit-based in a small environment with 2 staff members. So really kind of get more individualized attention in areas that are concerning. And then lastly, that really individualized plan. Again, like we kind of talked to that peak, we get very creative during these. We do have some things that we may turn to program-wise, but then we create what is the need within that program. We have here what's called our personalized offsite tutoring, which we call POST, which is really that usually a 4-to-1 ratio for teacher to student ratio. And these are more significant level students, but really is trying to get them to feel some connection, some success, building skill. And we always, our goal is to get them back into a building if they're completely out, or try to do some type of blended programming. Most of our students are not all or nothing. They are partly in their building and then receiving instruction to help them be able to acclimate back in or be able to stay in classes. Whether that's, again, behavioral, academic, social, we work across the board on where the need is.
So I gotta jump in again quickly, because one of the things that I wanna make sure that we highlight is, you know, that kind of light blue alternative programming bucket is really identifying programs that exist. So this is a program that we could enroll or move a student into. That last one, individualized plans, Jill is masterful at this, and she works with a team of individuals to be super responsive to kids' needs. And I'm gonna tell you that's something I'm really proud of in this system, is that, you know, very often people will say, well, what exists? What can we do to support this kid? And I'm gonna tell you, every single year, really, I feel like almost monthly, we're coming up with a plan we haven't done before. We have a student who has needs, and our goal is to get them to be a graduate of this district and a contributing member of our community. And how are we gonna do that? It might not be something that exists. It might be something built in collaboration with that family. And I just wanted to say that because Jill's not gonna brag on herself and the work that she does, but she really comes up with some plans for kids that are way outside of the box. And her next couple slides are gonna illustrate some of the success she has with that type of programming.
So I just wanted to highlight a couple of the programs. We're not gonna go overboard on it. One of the biggest ones, our Gdl2 program. That's our alternative to graduation program that is housed down here. So we were in a year, what I would call a very responsive year from coming out of COVID. And we had 56 students that enrolled in that program, which by far was the largest we've had in years. Not a great problem to have. However, students came in motivated and they created a great sense of belonging and a goal of graduation. These were not kids who had given up on themselves, and we hadn't given up on them. And of that group, 53 had graduated. So our graduation rate was 94.6%, which is phenomenal. And the one thing I will say is, what I'm proud of, the 3 that did not, they have a story. And some of it was life got in the way. 2 of the 3 have not given up. They're coming back in the fall. They had to take care of some stuff themselves. They want to come back. So my goal would be that next year we can say that that group had actually 55 out of 56 and that graduated. So we worked really hard in that program again, kind of what I say, like a kumbaya, right? We're here we all know whatever happened in the past is in the past. This year we're going to do this. Kids can come into that program, and when you are completed with the requirements, you're done. So that's why we didn't have 56 all at one time. We do run 2 a morning and afternoon session, and kids entered at different times. But we're very proud of that. We're also proud that, can you go to the next slide? Mm-hmm. Some of our interventions at the high school are working. And we know that because I look at the incoming class for our Gdl2 program this year. Right now, we have 18. Huge difference, right? That is, now, will we get a couple more at the beginning of the school year? Possibly, or as the school year progresses, there's always a story that comes up or kids that move in. But I think that's huge and impactful to know the difference. The last couple of years, staff working really hard to recover credits and build some of the skill gaps, as well as utilizing things like our GPS program, which is housed in a manufacturing that helps some of those kids that want to do that learning hands-on based programming. There's things out there. This last school year, we had 175 students that rotated throughout the school day, utilizing our credit recovery and just building some skill and finding where the gaps were and bucking those in. Within there, we were able to capture 351 credits. And again, a lot of these kids are pulling themselves out from 2 years ago. Another thing I just want to look at is that we have what's called a literacy principles class. That class really targets students that are falling below their peers in their reading level. Sometimes has splintered skills, sometimes across the board just at a lower level, and other interventions haven't worked. Sometimes we've had move-ins that come in with lower reading. We want to be able to set them up for success. And we know for a lot of our programs for graduation alternative, you have to have a 9th grade reading level. Also, we know going out in the community, one of the most important things is that reading level, right? Being able to read anything from manuals to things on a job. So we have had 25 students throughout the school year utilize that program, and 19 of those 25 have either graduated or were able to enroll in another program by getting up those skills. So, I mean, I know that doesn't sound huge, but for us, these are the kids who have felt defeated for years and years, and we've been able to get them to say, hey, you can do this, and really target those skills upward.
Sorry, Joe, I went
That's okay.
backwards.
I didn't want to bombard you with data, so that is it for right now, unless you guys have some questions for me.
And or some direction.
Yeah.
I mean, our
Yeah.
intent is to come back in August and Jill will be presenting and asking for action on the plan that we present. So also let us know if there's information you need or things we need to be considering as in preparation for that.
I just wanted to say excellent presentation. Your information was great. I mean, it obviously, you get great satisfaction from your work. You could see it in your voice and you could see it in your face. And so I'm sure if those kids who have taken advantage of these programs haven't thanked you, I'm sure they want to. They maybe just aren't so sure how to do that. So, you know, I'm sure their families would want to thank you as well. And it's exciting to see that, you know, those numbers are coming down from your, you know,
Yes.
highest number to, so obviously the earlier interventions are obviously working. And, you know, just keep up the great work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions? I agree. I'm very grateful for the presentation and for the data as well. This isn't necessarily something that everybody sees when they walk through a high school hallway. And so this is great work. It's behind the scenes, but wow, how impactful. So I look forward to seeing their next presentation when it comes up for action.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that, we are on to future agenda items. I'll start with our board meeting calendar upcoming. So on July 27th this week, we've got a policy committee meeting at 4 p.m. I believe it is here, right in this room. Then our next board meetings will be on August 8th, August 22, and September 12th, all at 5:30 p.m., all at the Education Service Center. We also then have a curriculum committee in the middle there on August 16th, 8:30 a.m. here at the Education Service Center. And then also, Superintendent, you talked about scheduling potential work sessions probably in early August, so stay tuned for that as we continue to compare calendars and check availability. Any questions on the calendar? Any other items for follow-up and communication this evening? All right, hearing none, and as we've nearly reached the end of our agenda, we have an item to discuss in executive session. And so, I would move to adjourn into executive session pursuant to Wisconsin Statutes 19.851C to consider employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and take any such action if necessary based on its discussion, namely compensation. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second to adjourn into executive session. And thanks to these nice notes that I received, this is a roll call vote. So I'll turn to my roll call sheet and I will call the roll. Ms. Justman?
Yes.
Mr. Donaldson?
Yes.
Mr. Ongert?
Yes.
Mr. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mr. Swigert votes yes. Ms. Erica?
Yes.
And Ms. Schmidt?
Yes.
Thank you. That vote is unanimous. We are adjourned into executive session. Thank you everyone for coming and for listening. Have a good evening.